Okay, Mary, thank you. And good
Second.
morning. Okay, the motion was made and seconded. And all in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, the consent agenda passes then. Farhad, do we need to do with anything with items B and C on here?
No, those are as part of the consent.
All consent?
Your motion and approval
Okay. All right.
approves those action items.
Good.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I do just a point of just a comment, and I did second it. You know, it's interesting that we would put in informational items there, and I don't know if there's any conversation in the future about informational versus action fraud. I'm not sure what your thoughts are there. I'm fine with it. I just wanted to point that out. Maybe in the future we can have more conversation about some of those. Just a thought.
Sure, Mr. Chair, Mr. Ortega. Those informational items are not being acted on. They're there for information. And at any time, if anyone would like to discuss those items, we can discuss those items at any time. So it's mainly there to make sure that the information is at your pleasure. You can discuss it if you like, but they're not there for an action, obviously.
So thank you. I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman. Farhad, I appreciate that. I think the bottom line is by you presenting it and us acting on it, is that giving approval, if you will, of that information, or assuming that we don't have questions or we don't have any comment on it going forward. I just want to make sure that there's at least an opportunity in the future, because the way it's presented, it's just a consent item. And it's like, okay, that's great, but what is the value of voting on an informational item? I guess that's what at some point in the future maybe we could talk about.
Sure, we'll be happy to. If you look at the individual memos for each item, on top of the memo, it specifically describes whether it's an action item or information item, and it even has a recommended motion for approval. So those information items are not being acted on. They're not there as an item to approve or not. But we can separate them somehow in the future if that's more helpful.
Thank you.
Mike, I appreciate you bringing that up, and that's actually why I asked the question about B and C. So I think we were tracking on the same line. I read the information and I didn't have any questions. So I assumed that by approving the consent agenda, we were also saying that we were in agreement with the information contained within those information items. But I too had the same question. So I think it was a good question, or at least one that I had as well. So, all right. Anything else on that item? All right, then we'll go ahead to item number 3, fiscal year 2022-2026 Transportation Improvement Program Development Process Update. Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to provide an update on the process to develop the fiscal year 2022 through 2026 PAG Transportation Improvement Program, or TIP. At the September meeting, we shared a presentation that covered the fiscal year 22 through 26 TIP development process as described in the Notice of Funding Availability, or NOFA memo, issued in August. Some key considerations for the TIP development process were described in the memo, which identifies only funding sources available for fiscal years 22 through 26. The only funds eligible for new programming in this TIP include Federal Transit Administration 5307 and 5339 transit programs and Surface Transportation Block Grant, or STBG Flex, transit-only funds. The TIP development process takes about 10 months, with draft project lists such as the RTA, transit, and ADOT lists developed at different times. This slide shows the TIP development timeline and key milestones. Since the process kicked off in August, a number of meetings have occurred with the goal of developing draft TIP project lists that are fiscally constrained. These included individual member jurisdiction meetings in September, 2 TIP subcommittee meetings in October, transit working group meetings in August, October, November, December, and January, and Transportation Planning Committee or TPC meetings in February and earlier this month. These meetings are listed in the memo for this agenda item. In your packet, there are several draft TIP project lists. Each project list uses different funding sources informed by distinct regulations, policies, and/or other limitations that govern use of those funds. Therefore, each project list stands alone and each is fiscally constrained. For the draft RTA project list, the TIP subcommittee approved this list in October. Since that time, changes to the funding for the ADOT project lists have been made. Those changes are highlighted in the list and were approved by the TPC at the March 3rd meeting. Also, there are 2 transit project lists, both of which were approved by the Transit Working Group. These lists are the draft transit project list funded by 5307, 5339, and STPG Flex programs, and the draft RTA transit project list. Additionally, there are 2 lists of aviation projects in your packet, including a list of draft Tucson Airport Authority projects and a draft Marina Airport project list. Projects in these lists were provided by the responsible airport agency. Finally, the ADOT project lists were approved by the TPC at their March 3rd meeting. With regard to the draft RTA project list, it's important to mention support expressed by the RTA Citizens Accountability for Regional Transportation, or CART committee. This is conveyed in the February 16th memo from the CART chair, Charlene Robinson, to the RTA board vice chair, Mayor Tesso. Excerpts from the memo are included on this slide. The memo mentions the CART's unanimous endorsement of the list, affirming that programming funds in the actual year that the funds are needed is a fiscally sound and prudent approach in delivering projects, and recognizing that the draft RTA project list is in compliance with the RTA board policy. In terms of next steps, we will present draft project lists to seek public input on draft fiscal year 2022 through 2026 TIP elements. We'll continue the process to model for air quality and Title VI conformity. The proposed TIP will be reviewed by the TPC, followed by a 30-day official public comment period. And review of the proposed TIP by the Management Committee is anticipated for May, as well as a request to approve the TIP by the PAG Regional Council following a public hearing. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I'm happy to take any questions.
Are there any questions for Mr. Brown and his presentation? Thank you, Jamie. I appreciate it. Any questions from the board of Mr. Brown and his presentation?
Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
I'm just curious, and I'm not sure who might be able to answer this, but at what point, and I know that you said the management committee and everybody kind of takes a look at it, at what point is it available for all of us to take a look at, and kind of in a holistic manner, the entirety of the TIP?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Ortega, members of the committee. Actually, as we speak this week, we're assembling all the different components of the TIP so that we can provide that as soon as possible. I don't want to put a firm date on that, but I think next week may be the soonest we can provide that. It needs to go through our internal review process. It has, in addition to the text and the maps, it has 11 appendices. So it's a big document, and that's why it takes some time to assemble it. So again, we're assembling it this week. I hope we can maybe have it available to post on the website as soon as next week. But I would also defer to Mr. Mohimi if he has other thoughts on that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I don't have anything to add other than obviously our goal is to make sure we have a draft document prior to scheduling our open house and the public input process. So typically we try to do those in March, no later than April. So definitely that is our kind of a milestone to be able to have a draft document before we schedule our open houses.
Very good.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate that. And I guess this really more for the group to think about as we go down this path, given all of the challenges, that all of us have, obviously, we need to see that sooner rather than later, just to see how it all goes together and how it all fits. And I'm just a little nervous about getting it, closer to when we need to take action and not having an opportunity to truly dissect it and go through it in detail. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Mike. Any other questions from the board?
Yeah, I put my little hand raised there, so I wasn't sure if I can just jump in.
Oh, yeah, there it is. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
this is Artemio with the Pascuayaki tribe. Just a couple of
Yes,
questions,
sir.
I guess. Kind of reflecting on what happened a couple of years ago, and I thought there was going to be more attempts of transparency and clearance and inclusion. I guess I don't see where, does the TPC still review projects list and approve come forward to the management committee? We approve. Am I missing a step or a couple steps?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Mr. Hoyos. So I can go back to the slide to show the committee meetings that occurred and the different steps in our process. It's important to mention that at one time we were anticipating meeting with the TPC in December and January. However, we were awaiting approval from the lower committees on some of the project lists. So we decided to postpone those meetings so that we could have as many lists as possible for those meetings to make best use of everyone's time. Unfortunately, that pushed the review by the TPC to February. And then we had another meeting last week as well. So those meetings have occurred. They just have occurred later in our process than we typically would like to have those. And again, I can go back to that slide where we highlighted all the different TIP subcommittee meetings and transit working group meetings, the individual meetings with our member agencies. So, to your point, I feel like we've had a number of meetings, but we have had the TPC meetings later than normal.
So they did get a chance to approve?
The TPC approved the ADOT project list as presented last week.
But the entire, did they approve the entire?
So it might actually help to bring that slide back, Jamie. So the actual approval takes place in April. That's the draft document. If I'm following your chart here. Yes. So April, TPC recommends approval. And then at that point, that's when the final process begins. And then it goes back to the management committee in May and the regional council following management committee. So leading up to the April meeting, as you can see, all these other committees are making recommendations on the 6 different lists that Jamie described. And all of that are the different components that go into the draft. So at the next meeting of the TPC, that's when they get to make a recommendation so we can begin the formal process.
So the management committee is not going to be able to approve the list or see the list before it goes out to the public?
Management committee will see the list in May, and then public hearing is scheduled late in May. So between April and May timeframe, that's where the public comment period would be, and regional council would be provided all the comments received from the public, and then they will hold a public hearing, and then they would act on it at that time.
All right, and then I saw that you put quotes up there. Can you go back to the quotes?
Sure.
Now, are those policies or are those quotes from just the chair?
Those quotes that we included on this slide are from a memo from the RTA CART chair to the members of the CART committee, to the RTA board vice chair.
And are those aligned with the policy?
Mr. Hoyos, do you mind refreshing my memory on which policy you're referring to?
I guess, again, because, you know, I've done this before in the past, and I guess, you know, when we're presented with stuff like this, usually the policy would be presented, but not quotes. And so I guess I'm thrown off by getting the quotes rather than the policy itself.
If I may, Jamie, so as you all know, there is an independent citizens committee that's responsible for the oversight of the RTA project delivery. And that committee, early on, they had requested to be able to see the 5-year plan. The 5-year plan was provided to them after the recommendations were made by the TIP subcommittee. And they have been very interested to make sure that the 5-year RTA plan is in compliance with the policies. So they did obviously have an opportunity to discuss it. And then this was following their discussion that you unanimously approved that the 5-year plan that's drafted is in compliance with the RTA policies.
And then I got one more question, because again, this was things I was going through a couple of years ago, is the STPG and the HERF, you know, there was updated funding or new funding. We had long conversations a couple of years ago about this, about how it would be presented, how people would be included in it. But it came late again, right? And then only certain jurisdictions took advantage.
So I'll go back to Jamie's. Jamie, go back to your slide discussing the NOFA process. So as you all recall, all the HERF funds as well as the federal funds are committed and obligated to delivery of the RTA projects. When the NOFA was issued back in August, the only funds that were available were the transit funds. There were no other funds that were available. So from an obligation perspective, by policy, all the funds other than the ones that are shown here, the 5307, 5339, and the SDBG Flex for Transit were already committed and obligated to RTA projects.
So the new funding didn't really, like, it came out in February? Because you know, I don't participate in the TPC. You know, I have Jason Bahi participate, but yeah, it was just like, you know, these funds came out of nowhere. You know, did it go through a NOFA?
No. So again, the August NOFA outlined that there are no other funds other than the 3 that you see on the second bullet. So again, if there are new funds, which we understand that there are going to be some new funds available, we'd go through the NOFA process. We'll identify how much is available and what criteria needs to be used. And at that time, we go through our normal process for programming new funds. We anticipate there's going to be some new federal funding. We're still waiting to hear from ADOT. So we'll do that at that time.
All right.
Are there any other questions from the committee members?
I have some follow-up questions, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Mike.
If you can go back to the slide, Jamie, that has the schedule. So I guess this is what I was, and thank you, Artemio, for pushing this, because I think this is what I was asking in terms of when are we going to see the whole thing, and at what point can we weigh in? And I understand that the subcommittees come through and make their recommendations. But back to Artemio's point, I don't want to compress the timeline for us to really dissect and make sure that that we're providing input before that public hearing is outlined. And oftentimes when we start talking about this in May, and we start looking at some of the opportunities or challenges, quite frankly. And I remember a couple of years ago, we went down this path, like them, and it was really tough because it felt like we were up against a deadline and had to make a certain call. And so I would suggest, Mr. Chairman, that maybe we call a separate meeting or an earlier meeting in April to discuss it in a little more detail. It's just a thought, because I'm just nervous about the timeframes that we outline, right? Because then if we meet, say, the first or second week of May as management committee, and then the public hearing is scheduled for the latter part of May, as Farhad mentioned, there's not a lot of time for us to make any changes to that. It's already pretty well baked. And then there's an expectation that the executive committee folks are going to be addressing it the next month. So I'm just throwing that out to the group. I think that a holistic picture of this would be of value to really make sure that we all are up to date on how it all works and how it all goes together. And that clarity, I think, would be of tremendous value for us, is my opinion. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, do any other committee members have any, share the concerns from Mike?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Hi, Carmine DeBonis, Pima County. I think that the points about having time to view the entire package are, well-founded and certainly supported by Pima County to have the opportunity. I thought what the city manager may have suggested is scheduling a management committee meeting in April prior to the beginning of the 30-day public comment period to look at the entire package. And Pima County would support that. I think it would give an opportunity for the management committee to ask questions, get additional information, have any responses provided and adjustments if necessary prior to entering into the public comment period, that 30-day public comment period. So I would certainly support that. I think overall, anything that can be done to get information sooner and to improve overall transparency and openness of the process would be beneficial. And, maybe taking a look after this cycle concludes on how to maybe make adjustments to enable for that expanded input and openness as we then start for the next cycle. So that would, be appreciated as well.
Thank you, Carmine. Any other committee members want to speak to this issue? Have any comments, thoughts?
Jerry, if appropriate, I would suggest that we call, I don't know what the process is, if we have to make a motion and ask for a vote on making or putting together a meeting for April before that 30-day comment period is, but I would certainly suggest that very strongly. If it isn't a motion or it isn't necessary, maybe you as a chair can get us together and get that done. That'd be my suggestion.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Ortega, we can definitely do that. I believe the TPC meeting is scheduled for April 22nd. So I would recommend that you would allow the TPC to make their recommendation and then have the management committee meet after you have a recommendation from TPC. So we can coordinate that, and we can definitely work with TPC and even move their schedule up as well.
Mr. Chairman, as long as that doesn't cause us some challenges with 30-day comment period. So it sounds like that's pretty late in the month. So I would suggest that the TPC be moved up. So that gives us time to have conversation before that 30-day comment period starts. As long as that's the case, then I'm good with it.
Yeah, that's definitely that's doable.
Yeah, this isn't an action item per se, but I think that the points that have been raised are good points, or they're valid points. And unless anybody else has any additional comments, I'm going to recommend that we go ahead and do exactly what has been suggested by several members of the panel of the committee, and that is arrange for a meeting of the management committee in April, preferably, early, as early in the month of April as possible, to give an appropriate amount of time and to allow for the 30 days of public comments, which has already been indicated. Farhad will probably result in the TPC meeting to move up their meeting. So I would suggest that we leave that in your hands and allow you to make what changes need to be made and inform us once you've arrived at a decision.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, we'll be happy to. So we'll definitely try to get the TPC to meet earlier in April, and then following the TPC, we'll schedule a management committee as well.
Excellent. Thanks, Mike, Carmine, et al. For your comments and suggestions. I think that's good.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Anything else on item number 3, the update from Mr. Brown? Having heard none, then we'll move on to item number 4, FAST Act performance measure projections. Mr. Mitchell.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everybody, members of the committee. My name is David Mitchell. I'm a senior transportation planner here for PAG. I'm bringing forward today the FAST Act performance measure projections. These are, this is an action item, and I will be asking for management committee's approval to recommend the adoption of ADOT's 2021 statewide safety projections. This is, there are 2 informational items within my presentation. I'm going to go over those first because they are related. They're also FAST Act projections. These are related to infrastructure and system travel time reliability. I will also go over the RMAP safety performance, since we do an annual exercise to do the safety projections for the statewide measures. We think it's appropriate to also look at what's happening specifically in the PAG region in regards to safety on our roadways. The infrastructure and reliability projections I mentioned, these were adopted by Regional Council in 2018. They were established by ADOT as a 4-year projection program with a 2-year midterm review. We are at that midterm point, and ADOT has elected to revise 3 of the projections that they originally established. And so that's what I'm bringing forward today, is just the information, the changes that they made. And again, there is no action. These are the 6 measures and projections that Regional Council adopted in 2018. 2 of the ones, these are related to infrastructure. 2 of the ones that changed are noted on the right-hand column with the strike through. That was a previous projection, and they revised those to be what is now in the left-hand column. They are being a little bit more conservative with their original estimates. This is what it looks like for the PAG region, and with those statewide projections applied for analysis. We perform very well in terms of interstate pavement conditions. We have very little in poor, as you can see in the graphs. Most of ours is well above statewide averages in interstate condition, with our pavement quality around the 80th percentile. But it is important to note that only a very small percentage of our roadways is on the interstate. Only just over 100 miles of roadway, about 1.3%. This is the pavement condition on the non-interstate, but the NHS subset. Again, we perform pretty well in terms of good condition. We're right on par with state averages. Where we are below, or I would say, in the poor condition, we do have more than statewide average. But again, this is a very small percentage of our network, and majority of the NHS that is represented here will be included in the Miracle Mile and Oracle Road improvements that have just been kicked off by ADOT. So next time we review these, we should see our values come down. These are the bridges on the NHS that accounts for a little bit more than half of our region's bridges. We are performing well in both good condition and poor condition measures. We have seen a significant improvement in the last few years thanks to the improvements along I-10 in the East Corridor, expanding out to Vale with those series of bridges to Davidson Canyon, Wilmot, Craycroft, and we're also seeing the benefit of the Ina Road completion in that area. The other category of projections that were revised or the system reliability, these relate to travel times on the interstate and NHS networks. And ADOT revised their 4-year projection to be a little more conservative with freight travel times, that, as you can see noted in the table here. They are projecting a slight increase in travel times during peak hour for trucks throughout the state. And this is what it would be like applied to their projection to the PAG region. We perform very well in this area. We are seeing a slow and steady increase, but we are right about statewide averages for that. That was for on the interstate. This is for the NHS as a whole, and it's for more than just freight. These are for personal and all vehicles. We perform exceptionally well with exceeding 95% in both categories of travel time reliability on the interstate and on the non-interstate NHS. That concludes the non-informational part of my presentation. I'll pause to see if there are any questions before moving forward.
Are there any questions from committee members up to this point in the presentation?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to understand the change when you adjust the metric. I'm curious as to how ADOT adjusts metrics and then has a scorecard against that new metric. It just seems counter to the way we normally approach this, and I'm not following that exactly. I mean, I understand the average going up and that, but if you're comparing that from a performance standpoint, it's like moving the goalpost, right? Or shortening it up depending on whatever suits you. It just seems odd to me. I don't know, maybe you can explain that to me a little better.
Sure, yeah, Mr. Chair, if I may, and thank you, Mr. Ortega, for the question. Yeah, the way that ADOT does their projections is based on historical data, and they are taking into account of what the data shows, but also into account what their improvement program is. They've been focusing more on a preservation first strategy, and they have been doing less of a fixing the poor first. That used to be the way of going, but now they've kind of changed their strategy. So that's given them a little bit of a different perspective on the timing of and delivery of certain projects in certain areas. They were also setting their 4-year targets or projections at a time when the Fast Act program had just started. And so they didn't have the best data or practices available to them at that time. And so they had set the numbers that you see here on the screen. Regional Council did adopt those into perpetuity, and ADOT has given us the courtesy of showing those. They do explain a little bit of their methodology in the packet that I've provided in the meeting attachments. There are slides for 2 different presentations that ADOT delivered, the infrastructure and travel time and the safety ones, which is coming up next, but those are inside the packet. In terms of how we would use this as a region, we are required federally to participate in the Fast Act program. ADOT's recommendation is for MPOs to support and adopt their projections for the reason that they've already accounted for using the same data that we're using. They have improved resources, and they are available to, they work with MPOs and transportation planners to help develop the methodology So they've recommended to do so because there are very few benefits for an NPO to set their own projections. The answers that we've got back is that it only allows us to have a little bit more insight to our region, but it comes with a lot of overhead and reporting requirements that we may not be able to resource very well on our own efficiently. So this is why the program exists in the way it does, is the state sets their projections. We have the opportunity to adopt or set our own. And it is PAG staff's recommendation, as well as the Transportation Planning Committee, to adopt these projections, or have adopted these ones in perpetuity. So there is no action on these ones, but that had been the recommendation.
Mr. Chairman, so I'm going to push back a little bit on the perpetuity comment, because I remember that conversation a couple of years ago, and I thought that the way that we worded that, it wasn't a courtesy for ADOT, it was a requirement that they come back on an annual basis. You know, we went through this exercise and had a pretty lively discussion, as I recall, outlining the
Here, Mr. Ortega, sorry to interrupt, but that's the next item that Dave was going to discuss. This is a separate
I understand, but when he said perpetuity, I just wanted to make sure that I was clear.
Yeah, no, we're on the same page. That's the next item, and that's the one that comes back every year for action.
I understand. So I just wanted to make sure that David was clear then that, you know, it's really not a courtesy from ADOT, it's a requirement. But going back to these points, and again, I understand the recommendation regarding the pieces of I guess I'll call them the metrics. I just am concern is probably too strong. I'm just curious about how we change your ADOT, and then we recommend changes to those metrics if they're used as a report card. I mean, that's all I guess I'm saying, is if we're going to test against them, but we move them, then the data sets may not be as relevant in terms of you know, a report card for how we're doing.
I can answer that. The state is evaluated by the federal program requirements. There's a review process that comes up in 2022. We're right now at the mid-performance period, so they have not had a review yet. So I'm not fully certain and aware of what that entails. However, we have had the questions and answers back that there are no report cards for a region. So if the region does not perform to this projections by the state, for example, our actual value is less than what the state has projected for the statewide average, there is no penalty to the region, and there is no penalty to the state or requirement for them to take action specifically for a region. It is strictly to help facilitate the FAST Act program and to track the goals that the program, that MAP 21 originally established. And two of the categories were for infrastructure and system reliability, to relieve congestion on our roadway networks and to improve quality of life in certain other aspects. And so this is more of a tracking program than it is a reporting program. There are more requirements if we were to set our own projections. Even then, there are no penalties to the region. It basically puts us through an exercise of collecting information to use for our own benefit and no other value. We would probably have very similar. We would set same methodologies for our region. We would be able to certainly examine what we're doing at a local level to see what the impact that might have, but that would be a benefit yet to be determined, and there's no reporting or accountability requirements to not do so.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Any other questions up to this point of the presentation for Mr. Mitchell?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Carmine DeBonis again. I think to the point about you know, the performance targets and, you know, what they represent, and I heard, and that was one of the questions I was going to ask, what's the impact of not meeting those targets? And it was said that there is not an impact. I just want to make sure. So for example, if you can go back to the interstate pavement in good condition slide. So if I understand correctly, the ADOT projected performance is 44%. That's the target, and that the actual performance is up, in the high 70%. Am I interpreting that correctly?
Mr. Chair, if I may, and thank you, Carmine, for the question. I would like to address the term target. These are not targets. These are projections. They are for one-year forecasts based on historical data. And so as they appear on this slide, the 44% is not a target. This is applying the projection of the statewide values, if you would. We are not trying to, as a region, maintain our level above that or avoid or to try to maintain where we are for any purpose. In fact, ADOT uses our current conditions to set their projection for the statewide average. Maricopa County and Pima County certainly have a huge influence on statewide measures, but as we see on this slide, we only have 100 or so miles on the interstate system. I'm not sure what the statewide has, but I believe that's not in the top. I believe it might be the top 3. So we do have an influence on statewide pavement conditions, and we, as you see in these slides, we perform very well and influence the state's projections favorably. If we perform worse than we are, we would affect the state projections for the following year period to be reduced. So does that answer your question?
So if I may just follow up, so the 44% projected performance is for the Pima County region?
That is for the state. That is a statewide projection for interstate pavement.
And then the actual performance number, what is that related to?
The actual performance, that is the PAG region value. So this is our 5-year history. The baseline value you see here is what we discovered when creating the RMAP. That was when we started our performance measure program. And fortunately, we have this data available because of it. Some MPOs don't have data prior to 2018, for example.
Okay, and that helps because the projected performance and the actual performance relate to two different areas. The projected performance is statewide. The actual performance is Pima County region.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay.
Sorry for the confusion.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions up to this point of the presentation before Mr. Mitchell continues and finishes up? All right, Mr. Mitchell, please continue.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I'll advance through here. So as we preview, this is regarding the safety projections, and they are statewide projections again. This is the action item. There will be an opportunity to discuss and ask questions at the end and before we go to a vote. Before we really get into the FAST Act measures, I want to first go over the safety conditions and the current status of the PAG region, so we have a good understanding of how we are performing and how we're using the performance to track to our long range goals. And so we'll jump right into this slide, which is showing the different safety visions and goals that PAG has adopted in their policies and plans. In the strategic safety plan, and we've got a vision to work towards 0 deaths on our public roadways. And the goal is to, every time we implement a project, a group of projects, we program our TIP, we should be looking to reduce the number of fatalities and serious injuries by a significant amount. And we've quantified that by 7 to 10% to help drive us long-term towards as close to 0 as possible. We know there are other influences on the roadway network that are non-transportation related. And so there's a significant reason to want to to drive those down and eliminate all those the best we can with the performance of our roadways. And this is what we have to help guide us through not only target setting, but also tracking our performance towards those targets. The targets that we adopted in RMAP are to drive fatalities and serious injuries significantly down from 2015 values. We see the numbers here for on our roadways. We want to see a 25% reduction from 2015 values and a 45% reduction as well in fatalities and fatality rates and serious injury rates. And we have a significant focus on pedestrian and bicycle injury and fatality reductions as given in those targets. So we use these to measure PAG's performance every time that we report out. We do reports for performance whenever we do a long range plan update, and we do it every time we do a transportation improvement program. So every time that we present new projects or a new document, we do evaluate and report out on the current condition towards reaching these targets. And this is where we are at current state. Right now, we are getting worse or not working towards achieving our target in 10 of the 13 performance measures related to safety. These are for our 2045 targets. We are not getting the results that we would need to achieve those targets, particularly in the ones where listed on the right. There's everything related to pedestrians and bicycles. There's a very concern to the region, and it is obvious here that we are not on pace to achieve our safety related targets. So with that, we will now look at the projections for statewide safety related performance measures. ADOT established these, and now PAG staff, transportation, TPC, and TSS subcommittee have recommended adoption of these projections. As a review, the FAST Act is a federal program. It uses performance measures to track nationwide performance against MAP 21 goals. And this has been an exercise since 2018 by ADOT and the MPOs of the state. The FAST Act uses language, they use terminology targets, but they are in fact projections and predictive in nature. ADOT and PAG, we like to use the word projections because that's in truth what they are, with the data being historical, and we are only using predictive measures for what's going to happen in the short term. The FAST Act measures are statewide projections, and they're, again, anticipated performance for the short term, and they're not long range or aspirational targets like what we have and use with our RMAP. And the way that we participate as a region, as PAG participates in the program, is we support the ADOT targets by tracking the federal required measures and reporting them out. As you have seen in the slides, that is how we report out to ADOT how we are performing. These are the projections that the state sees for 2021 in regards to the 5 safety-related performance measures. I have highlighted the ones in red to indicate those are the ones that are not assisting our region in achieving our long-range goal. In all of our safety-related measures, we want to have a decrease. And so the only ones that are supporting a decrease are the 2 in green. These are statewide measures, and these are being applied to the current value of 2019 crash data. And the crash data is presented in terms of 5-year averages. So you'll see decimal points in certain categories where you wouldn't think, but they are 5-year averages. These projections here are what the state anticipates and predicts to be for 2021 based on best available current data. This is what it would look like applying the statewide projection to the PAG region's 5-year average of data. Last year, we, as a region, unfortunately had 5-year average was 126 fatalities on our public roadways. applying the 8.1% increase would bring that above 127. As we saw in the slide reviewing our current performance, the number of fatalities is not currently tracking towards performance and getting worse. And so that is partially in agreement with the projection for ADA is that the trend of our region, as you see here, over the last 3 years has been an astounding sharp increase in fatalities on our roadways. The data table below gives you the numerical values for such. We are able to show you 2020 safety and crash data. It is important to note that it's not official until July of this year. That allows for clerical errors and for review of certain cases to be reviewed and corrected in the data system. And generally, in terms of fatalities, if there are edits, they go up and they don't go down. This is how the PAG region performs in terms of fatality rate. This is determined by vehicle miles traveled. And you can see with a 0% increase, the state projects that we will be at the same level as last year, which unfortunately we are still at a very sharp increase over the last 3 years. This is the graph for serious injuries. The state projects a 4% decrease. We are seeing the same thing for our region. This will bring our number down below 400 for the first time at least in viewable history of our data. This is applying the 6% decrease to the serious injury rate on our roadways. Again, this is determined by VMT. We are seeing a nice and slow decrease in numbers. We will be approaching just 5 injuries per 100,000 miles, serious injuries per 100,000 miles. And the fifth and final measure, this is for bicycle and pedestrian. It's a combined measure for pedestrian and bicycle fatalities and serious injuries. We have seen a a steady increase since 2015 when we first adopted our RMAP safety goals and measures. And the state projects a 2% increase in our current value. And you can see that would bring us up to this current 117 projected value. And with that, I've concluded information, but I will open it up, turn it back to you, Mr. Chair, for any questions. And I'll stay online.
Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. Good presentation, good information. Any questions, comments, thoughts from any of the committee members?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Carmine.
Hi, David. So, your clarification that these are performance forecasts and not targets. Is there a structure for targets towards those areas that are moving in directions undesirable for us? So the increase in fatalities, for example, is there a separate set of statewide targets for reductions? If this is just forecasted performance, we're following a trend, and is that trend going to continue up or is it going to reverse and come down? Is there any other set of or any other structure for establishing targets for a percentage reduction in fatalities, for example, or any of the other categories?
Yeah. Yes, thank you for that question, Carmine. Very, very good question. Yes, the state does have different performance measures that they track. The ones that we see today are just to fulfill the requirements of the FAST Act program. The state has every year issues a highway safety plan, and in those they do report out on the different measures and how they are tracking to their long range goals. And there are additional ones and even broken out by different categories. I'm sorry I don't have specific information, but I can give you an idea of they could break down actions by crash type, causing factors, is it human behavior, is it roadway conditions, is there alcohol involved? Those types of information are reviewed within their state plan, and they have their own measures to to track statewide performance on such.
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Carmine.
Yeah, David, thank you for that. And I think just distribution of maybe a link to where that information is available for access by the management committee members would be appreciated.
Sure, if it's okay with you, Mr. Chair, we could include that in the meeting minutes.
That would be fine. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I may add, obviously, when we do our long-range plan, all that information is typically used as input into the statewide long-range plan. So they do look at our targets from our long-range plan and try to integrate that into the statewide as well. So really, I think David touched on it, the long-range plan, excuse me, long-range plan targets are really what's of critical importance to us locally, and the state does recognize that as well.
Good to know. Thank you, Farhad. Appreciate that.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Mike, go ahead.
Thanks, Jerry. So just, and I know that that my staff voted against this at the TPC, and before we go down that path, maybe we can take a step back and explain the value of us adopting the statewide safety projections. Here's the reason I asked. So we go down this path, ADOT establishes the projections, right? Then they modify them. And I think, David, you mentioned it's a 5-year smoothing or 5-year average that we go down. And that's fine. But what value is it for us to be weighing in on that? Is it just because they are interested in our opinion? I'm not following the tie that we have to this. And I know we do this annually, and it always just puzzles me. And I want to be a good partner to ADOT and support what they're doing, but I'm having trouble with that connection. And maybe you could just help me understand that, David. I appreciate it.
Sure. Yes, Mr. Ortega. Mr. Chair, if I may. And we do understand the city of Tucson's concerns with this type of program. We don't object to the stance that it takes, and we believe that it's good discussion. As in terms of your question on the benefits to the region of participating in it, honestly, we do it because it's a federal requirement. This was not something that regional council decided to do or that we feel local pressure to do. We participate in it because we are federally required. Fortunately for us, the measures that they are collecting are identical to the ones that we have for RMAP. So we are able to basically replicate the information and the resources that we've already allocated to participate in the program without any concerns or issues. If we did not choose to participate by adopting, we would have to do additional reporting activity to accomplish the same of what we are doing with the RMAP and our TIP reporting process. We did clarify with ADOT what benefits do we have by working with these projections, and it is important to note that the safety ones are the ones that come up annually. Those are the 1-year projections. The infrastructure and the system reliability ones, that is currently a 4-year program, and depending on what the current administration decides, that may or may not continue beyond 2022. That's still to be determined. But the safety ones are the ones that are annually. We do bring this to through the committee process annually. It was requested to do so. PAC staff supports to do so if we feel we want to use this as a chance to review the region's performance on an annual basis and compare it to what we are participating in terms of the FAST Act program. We do find that's where the value is, to see how we measure up against the state and with national standards, and how we as a region contribute to national goals.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, David. I guess I appreciate it. We had a pretty lively discussion about bringing this back annually. But as I heard the discussion, and I still remain concerned about the changes, again, to the metric and to the projection, it sticks in my craw that we make, and not necessarily us, but that we're supportive of projections that change. And then that's the metric that's used. If I'm understanding it correctly, that's the metric that's used as again, a report card. I understand, and I guess that is the way we do things. And I'm okay if that helps solidify federal money or federal opportunities for us as a region. I'm okay with that. It just, I question that, that's all. So thank you, David. I appreciate it.
Sure.
That's all, Chairman.
Mr. Chair, if I may, I could address some of that. As a region, we will not be evaluated on whatever stance we take to participate in the FAST Act program. In terms of funding, it has no effect on our region's funding. Everything is done at the state level. So if it was the region's decision to participate in a different format, there would be no difference in reporting or accountability in terms of funding.
Hey, David, but I assume that it helps the state. And if it does, I'm good with it, by the way. So as long as it brings more value to the state and or the region, I'm okay with it. So thanks.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? All right, having heard none, do I have a motion to accept the performance projections from ADOT?
I'll make that motion. This is Artemio.
Second.
Okay, the motion has been made and seconded. Any additional discussion? Move to the vote. All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? Okay, the motion passes unanimously. Item number 5. Yes.
And thank you, Commissioner. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. Appreciate your time. Good presentation.
Mr. Chair, in the interest of time, if you like, the other 2 items are informational. Depending on how much time everybody has, we could bring this item back at a later time if you like. And the next item we can be very brief on and give you an update on the LiDAR and the orthophoto. It's at your pleasure.
Unless anybody has objections, I say we push through and finish it up. Having heard none, item number 5, alternate fuel corridor deployment plan update. Mr. Fitzpatrick.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Dustin Fitzpatrick. I'm PAG's Air Quality Planning Coordinator, and I'll provide an update on our alternative fuels corridor deployment plan that we completed in November 2020. So FHWA's alternative fuel corridor program was a requirement of the FAST Act to designate corridors nationwide to increase use of electric, hydrogen, propane, and natural gas fueled vehicles. Rounds 1 through 4 resulted in nomination designation of more than 145,000 miles of corridors, along with the national highway system in 49 states. FHWA awarded grants to 5 organizations in 2019, including PAG, to develop alternative fuel corridor deployment plans. Arizona's corridors cover our main interstates with all fuels, and hydrogen's been nominated just last month in round 5 for Arizona. ADOT collaborated with Nikola Motors. They have semi-tractors in development using hydrogen. So on the bottom right there were the EV and CNG criteria that FHWA requires for these stations. DC fast charge only, 50 miles between stations, 5 miles from highway, and no Tesla stations. They're not public. And for CNG, 150 miles, 5 miles from highway, public, and fast fill. So PAG partnered with ADOT and Valley of the Sun Clean Cities Coalition on this project. We identified the stakeholders along the I-10 corridor, including the truck stop travel centers, which were selected as ideal locations for these facilities. Electric and gas utilities, EV charging, and CNG fueling companies, and other relevant parties. The Arizona Interstate Infrastructure Collaborative was formed, and we held quarterly meetings throughout 2020. So the goals and objectives of the plan were to transition the EV pending segments from Phoenix, California and Tucson to New Mexico. Those are stretches without enough charging stations to meet the distance requirement. Locations for EV were selected in Siloam, Tonopah, Wilcox, and San Simon. And for CNG, one will be in Wilcox or San Simon. So this is a picture of a typical DC fast charge station. These are a Nissan Leaf and Chevy Bolt charging there. It's 480 volt direct current versus your alternating current level 1 and 2, which are the 120 and 240 volt, which take 8 or 24 hours to charge. These are more in line of 30 minutes, 15, 30 minutes charging time for the vehicle. The power has increased over the years, started at 50 kilowatts 10 years ago. They've gone up to 125, 250, and now they're making 350 kilowatt chargers. This is a Love's. Trillium was one of the partners in the project. This is a typical fast fill station for CNG. You're looking at a 5 to 10 minute fill time for your passenger vehicle. So as part of the project, we developed a site suitability survey tool using the Survey 1-3 application. This is used to collect field data, catalog, and rank the potential sites based on their characteristics and such as parking spaces, food services, restrooms, and other amenities. This is the Survey 1-2-3 application map viewer, allows the users to view and strategize the layout and connectivity of the potential sites along the corridor, and can be modified and utilized for any fuel or corridor across the country. We developed a potential station route distance tool building on USDOE's NREL corridor maps. So we expanded upon the blue distance buffers and allow users to select any starting point along the corridor and return the nearest alternative fueling stations on the map with their distances from the starting point and station information. This improves the potential site selection process and met with our goal to be transferable for use along any national corridor. We came up with cost estimates for the EV and CNG stations. Again, for the EV, depending on how many chargers and the power that you're providing, looking between 100, 700,000. And then for CNG, there's medium and large station options. As part of the process, FHWA has a congestion mitigation air quality calculator. This was done for each of the potential sites to calculate the emission reductions. CMAQ funding is available for these locations statewide. And then we also looked, mainly these are funded by private sources. So we identified funding through Electrify America's Cycle 3 and applied. Spring, they'll announce the recipients of that funding. Tried to sync up the charging stations, charging providers such as ChargePoint, and EVgo has a grant with GM for these locations so that they could apply for that funding. We identified the signage available. ADOT offers their Grand Canyon State logo sign program for businesses advertising along the highways for use of specific signs. Alternative fuels. Unfortunately, MUTCD only allows for general service signs, and alternative fuels don't fall under the category of definition of gas. So changes would be needed to be made to that category to expand it just to a fuel designation. So this is important to the region because transportation emissions are a major contributor to ozone formation. On the left is the historical trend, and Pima County has barely stayed under the federal standard. We're still in attainment. On the right, that chart there shows the contributions to nitrogen oxides are dominated by on-road vehicles. So NOx and VOCs combined to form ozone. Ozone non-attainment designation would have implication to the region for transportation conformity, our state implementation plan, and requirements for adding additional transportation control measures. So this project will decrease range anxiety for traveling in and out of the region and increase adoption of less polluting EV and CNG vehicles. So the final plan is available on our website for anyone if they're interested in looking. I'll be happy to take any questions.
Any questions from the committee for Mr. Fitzpatrick? Dustin, thank you. Appreciate your time and the presentation.
Sure thing. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Item number 6, regional orthophoto and LiDAR data update. Mr. Hickson, you are on.
Thank you to the chair and the committee for the opportunity to present here. My name is Ben Hickson. I'm the senior GIS analyst here at PAG, and just going to give an overview of our proposed orthophoto and LiDAR acquisition here in 2021. First is our orthophoto project, which we're targeting this large block of Eastern Pima County. This extent established by our regional data working group. Funding partners are all local. As part of the working group, Tucson Electric Power, Regional Flood Control, U of A, libraries, the town of Marana, town of Fort Valley, and the town of Sardia. The extent covers just about 4,100 square miles, and it's a little bit different than some previous years. Our most recent would be 2019, which acquired 2 different extents for 2 different resolutions of imagery, a 30 centimeter and a 15 centimeter. This is targeting a simpler acquisition, so it's only 15 centimeter, but it's a larger area. So it's a little bit larger acquisition, but only one data product that the regional data working group went after. Notably, you can see the extent extends a little bit out of Pima County to cover all of Marana, and then at the request of the working group, the entire footprint of the Bighorn fire, which extended into Pinal County up there. So there's that little bump across the top. Separate and through a bit of a different process is our LiDAR acquisition, which is greatly expanded upon 2015 acquisition, which covered 2,200 square miles of Eastern Pima County. This is leveraging of partnerships with 5 different federal agencies, Potomac Automation, State Land, and then 7 other local partners outside of PAG to acquire this product. Again, this acquisition extent is established through the Regional Data Working Group in collaboration with our federal, state, and tribal partners. This is 8,500 square miles in total, and will ensure that the entirety of Pima County will have high quality and up-to-date elevation data. The 3DEP program, the 3D elevation program that we are cooperating with USGS on it, and is an effort to get that elevation data for the entire United States. The areas you don't see covered in Pima County, Oregon Pike National Monument over in the west, and then some of the donut holes over in the east have already been acquired either in 2020 or 2018. Ditto all of Santa Cruz County and Cochise, and a little bit of the tribal nation that's not picked up in this was also acquired in a 2020 acquisition. So in total, a big group of partners here that we are pleased to cooperate on. The benefits of these 2 products are numerous and almost bottomless. The very straightforwardly, the 15 centimeter product from the 2019 acquisition over Tucson High, just kind of showing the resolution, the clarity of the imagery that we got in that acquisition. Straightforwardly, visual inspection, both for us, our partners, and to firms, local firms that we'll be doing engineering projects, cartographic mapping, and support of those kinds of things. Importantly, also this image is only showing red, green, blue, your standard image. We have a fourth band of near infrared, which helps us pick up vegetation that is just a step above red. So we can't display all three at once, but that's one of the important benefits of this orthophoto project. One of the derivative benefits is our land cover analysis, which is a fairly involved process that uses both the orthophoto and the LiDAR as inputs. This is the 2015 land use land cover data set that was produced by Pima County and the Chesapeake Bay Conservancy in 2018 using our 2015 product. And that's basically taking every pixel of our orthophoto and lumping it into one of 7 to 10 categories, if it's desert or if it's vegetation or open water or structure, that sort of thing. This is useful for a whole variety of sources and uses, namely like quantifying our impervious surfaces, important for change detection, building footprints, how many pools we have in a given area, and that sort of thing. It's a really useful product to take the depth of the ortho imagery and then distill it into some fairly simple data. Another one is our tree canopy data set, which also takes a orthophoto and a LiDAR input that is important for a lot of planning purposes, green infrastructure, leveraged by our green infrastructure groups and our partners for that. Again, taking the imagery, the vegetation indices that we can derive from that, pairing it with the LiDAR, the elevation data, and extracting any vegetation that we can detect that is X number of feet above ground level. So in this case, we have a 6-foot canopy height model that we use, and we can easily pull out where we see tree vegetation. And then the LiDAR, straightforwardly, it's different than the imagery. If you're not familiar, it is a 3D model, basically, where you have points with an X, Y, and Z coordinate. It's very dense. This is the 2015, which is the quality level 2 data set that we picked up in 2021. We're aiming for a QL1, which is 4 times denser, so it's about 8 measurements per square meter, which gives us the ability to resolve even smaller objects across the landscape, cars or vegetation or small structures and that sort of thing. The number of products that can be derived from this is just enormous. I've got contours that we're going to be picking up, a height above ground model, so not just absolute elevation above sea level, but a relative elevation, slope analysis, 3D modeling. We'll be getting a hydrologic elevation data set out of this and byproduct from USGS, with regional flood control. We'll be using just change detection, like the list is almost endless given the density and the quality of the data that we're getting from this LiDAR data. And as I mentioned, it kind of goes on, environmental monitoring, the change detection, infrastructure planning, both for us and our regional partners, as well as firms that will also be able to utilize this data. And so that is my quick overview. If anybody has any questions.
Oh, I'm sorry, I was muted. Any questions for Mr. Hickson?
Mr. Chair, if you don't mind, I just want to thank all the partners. This is a significant investment for the region. And as you saw on the list of all the partners, we could not do it without their help. And I just want to acknowledge all the partners and thank staff for being able to pull together a really meaningful proposal to be able to obtain all this information. It's, as Ben said, it's very beneficial to the region, and I just want to thank all the partners.
Thank you, Farhad. Any questions for Mr. Hickson or any comments? I'll just say, Mr. Hickson, I thought that was a great presentation. Love the information. I always find that kind of stuff very fascinating. So really good presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. And with that, I will take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All right. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. We are adjourned. Thank you, guys. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.